Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and I'm coming at you once again because apparently I'm a crazy person. I mean, how else do you explain my going back and watching Gotham again, finally, after all these years, after I reviewed the first half of that season, of Season 4, with Eric, all those years ago? Yeah, I can actually say that now. I can say all those years ago. I don't know where the time goes, I don't know what's happening, and I don't even understand how good stories are told, or what characterization is, or what consistent continuity, or internal logic, or character motivations, or any of that stuff is after watching more of Gotham. I have once again forgotten how narrative works, just like I felt like I did doing Spawn Gear. Yep, I feel like I'm back to Spawn again. It's like the back of my chair says, is respawn. I'm respawning. That's what it feels like watching more Gotham. I'm going to tell you how I felt about the second half of Season 4. You're probably not going to be all that surprised about my sign flip, so I'm just going to go right ahead and do that. I was enjoying things about this, certainly, in the first half of the season, and I got bored with it, and Eric and I both did, which is why we stopped reviewing it. We thoroughly enjoyed Season 3. With just the, audacity of that season and how it seemed to fully embrace what we always felt like was a black comedy 60s Batman. We always said that, and before that it didn't seem to realize that. It was presenting itself a bit too earnestly, and then suddenly it seemed like it was like, oh, screw it. Like, we know what we are. We don't make any sense. We're ridiculous. We're an absolute farce. The whole thing is just about the beautiful look of the show, and it does continue to look absolutely beautiful. We don't have a story to tell. We don't have any points to make. We don't know where we're going. We're plotting scene to scene. The whole thing is a melodrama, a soap opera. We might as well just embrace that and make it exactly what it is, but in a more self-aware kind of way. And it got really fun. To be honest with you, I think, in a way, it's the most escapist thing I have ever watched. And Season 4 felt that way at the beginning, where it was just bat stuff crazy, and you're like, what nutso thing is going to happen next that they're going to sort of pretend to present as legitimate dramatic television? And they always top themselves. It was always something more insane and crazy and ludicrous after that. And then it just got really dull with all of the relationship stuff with Lee and Gordon, which I was sick of, honestly, in the previous season already, but they kept constantly going back and forth with it, where Lee would leave, and then she'd come back, and then she'd leave again, and it's like, we already went through all of this with Barbara. It was the reason Barbara should have been written out of the show or killed early on, because it's that Smallville thing where it's like, we're not going to let Gordon ever get with and stay with a girl, so what is the point of keeping this character around? And they never had one with Barbara, and then ultimately they didn't with Lee either. And I got sick of being jerked around with it. It wasn't relationship drama that I was interested in at all. The show doesn't know how to do a compelling romance. It doesn't know how to write compelling women. It might as well not even try. Just have, celibate cartoon characters. Or, I guess in this case, because it's such a black comedy thing, cartoon characters that are constantly having sex with each other but don't actually attempt to maintain an ongoing relationship. Or have characters attempt to do that. They realize that they're in a completely mad city that doesn't make any kind of sense, and that every time they try to go on a date, or they attempt to get married, or they try to do anything serious in their relationship, somebody close to them gets murdered, or the restaurant that they're having dinner at, or the church that they're trying to get married at ends up getting bombed, there's on fire, or a bunch of, madmen run in with guns, and they go, you know what, we've got two options, really. We either leave this stupid city and just let it tear itself apart, like it sort of has and manages to maintain and keep going for some reason all the time, or just stay and live here and not have relationships. I mean, that's what these characters should be doing. But they don't do that. They never learn anything. They regress constantly. Every single one of them. And there's not one character that has an arc, or sort of, the show pretends like they have arcs. There's not one character that is an ongoing character that you're supposed to be invested in, that's not just a supporting person that's there to give exposition or technobabble, like Lucius Fox, that is sympathetic. There's not one sympathetic character left in the show. Lee was one of the only holdouts, and she was becoming less sympathetic because of the way the relationship drama was handled. And by the end of the season, by the middle of the season, she's kind of just as horrible as everybody else. Gordon was thrown under the bus all the way back in season 2. And the show knows how unlikable he got. And now there's sort of a road to redemption thing done with him, but like they know there's no the whole show realizes that there's no coming back from a lot of the stuff that they did early on, so they kind of stopped trying, and that got refreshing, and then it started really repeating itself, and the shtick got old. You know, there's a reason that season 3 60s Batman, Adam West Batman, was the last season. I mean, the joke had already gotten stale by that point. To be fair, some of that was because the world had moved on from it. Like it was exactly what we needed, comedy and, again, escapism-wise in 1966. It just was perfect for the time that it landed in, with what was culturally happening in the world and how people were feeling about things. By 1968... in 1969, the world had changed. We had moved on, and it just was not a show that had legs. This I can't say the same thing about because it wasn't popular in the same way 60s Batman was. I don't know that the world was ever ready for Gotham, because 60s Batman knew exactly what it was, and I mean, there were tweaks that were made after that pilot, of course, and I wish it had stayed more like that pilot, but this show was always trying to find an identity, never quite understood what it was, and the world was never ready for it, but it became a one-note shtick, like 60s Batman kind of was, and there was always this really smart satire thing with 60s Batman, and this show didn't really have that. It was just shock for the sake of shock, plot twist for the sake of plot twist. You never believed that we were going to do this insane thing, right? Well, we did it. We'll do anything. There's nobody holding our leash. And I wish that there was more leash holding with this show to some degree, because if there were more limitations put on it, maybe it would be forced to attempt some actual storytelling. I mean, or maybe we wouldn't have wanted that. Maybe it would have been even worse. I don't know. So anyway, the only reason I'm even talking about this right now, I'm already 7.5 minutes in, is because I've decided to go ahead and finally finish the show. I'm a little bit of a completionist with things like this. I also happened to kind of be in a Batman mood one day, and I was like, or I had been for several days, and of course, you know, I'm a Batman guy. I'm always doing Batman stuff, but I was really in a Batman mood, Batman headspace, after I reviewed Asmani Gomez, the guy who made the fan demo for a 1989 Batman Returns Batman game. And I was playing some Arkham, and I was like, man, I just really want to watch some Batman stuff. And I guess I felt like watching something I hadn't seen. And I was like, I mean, there's Gotham. I never did finish that. I always kind of meant to go back, just out of morbid curiosity, especially after I found out that the last season was supposed to adapt loosely adapt No Man's Land. I'm sure it's very loosely, doing that. Especially after seeing the finale of this season, which is called No Man's Land, an episode title they really should have probably saved for the next episode. But we'll see how long that status quo lasts, because I will be really surprised if it's the entire season, if the whole season is actually really No Man's Land, because this is one of the most, by the way, bipolar and, jumping around kind of shows I've ever seen. I shouldn't say bipolar, I should say ADD. This show is a kid that has 6,000 toys and cannot play with any of them for more than 19 seconds. And then for some reason always still feels the need to put the toys back in the box, kind of. It's weird. Like, this kid can blow up all of his toys, and at the end of the day, miraculously, somehow they all come back to life again. That analogy went completely off the rails, and by the end, I don't know if it was a mixed metaphor or what it was, but it made about as much sense as the show ultimately ended up doing. I guess the day that I really felt like watching some Batman stuff was my one bad day. Yeah, that's the Alan Moore thing with Killing Joke. It only takes one bad day. That's supposed to ostensibly be the Joker's origin in that, is that it's just a guy who had one bad day, and he completely loses his mind, and he's never himself again. I think that probably happened to me a long time ago, but I think it's possible to relatively have more than one of those, and that must have been mine, because I was crazy enough to go back to this show. And by the way, that episode title that phrase is used as an episode title for the season, One Bad Day, which refers to, I guess, sort of Jerome's twin brother, who he allegedly drives insane, and he is going to be the real Joker when we get into season 5. I'll talk about all that madness here in a minute. I think that maybe I'm giving the show too much credit by saying this. I think there's maybe this attempt at a meta commentary thing going on here where the show, and I think it uses it as a cop-out too, where the show goes, let's make it kind of like Lost, where the title of the show is much or more about the audience than it is the people in the show. So Gotham signifies madness and insanity, and that's not just about the people in the show, that's you watching it. It will drive you crazy because you won't be able to make heads or tails of it, and you'll make the mistake of getting invested in certain characters and things, and then it will just turn everything on its head and basically point and laugh at you for caring, because ultimately there are no stakes in the show whatsoever. It's the comic event problem on steroids, where it's not just every time we have an event everything is reset and everything that you were reading and spending your hard-earned money on doesn't matter anymore. Now in Gotham it'll do it on an episode-to-episode basis, or maybe at every couple of episode basis is the longest you'll ever get with it. Constant status quo shifts all the time. Isn't it crazy that Bruce fired Alfred? I mean, don't worry, they're going to be friends again, and he's going to be living in the mansion again and working in the exact same capacity 2 episodes later. It's exactly that. I'm constantly comparing this to Smallville. I kind of at some point want to maybe write a video about this, do a written analysis comparing Gotham and Smallville and how Gotham made so many of the same mistakes Smallville did. That show did that kind of thing too, where it was like Clark has a sort of death of Superman thing, but it's not a literal one, right? A figurative death of Superman. I think at the end of season 8 into 9, if memory serves me, it was 9 to 10. I can't remember anymore. And he wears a black. It must have been 8 and 9 because that's when he fought Doomsday. And he's like, the Clark persona is dead. I have to bury that. And so that was his kind of figurative death of Superman. And then he's wearing a black T-shirt to signify that Clark has died, and all he has left is sort of, this emo Superman before he's calling himself Superman. And that lasted like an episode or 2. That was it. You had the same thing earlier on where Clark runs off to Metropolis and he's on Red Kryptonite, and that lasts a couple of episodes. But at least that was over a cliffhanger, and so there were 3 months in between. Gotham does the same kind of stuff, and all the time. So you have that thing with Bruce Wayne, and you have characters that, you think are dead or going to die, and then it turns out that they're fine, or they come back to life. That was already a problem. It's to the 9s now. I don't know if on one hand I could now count the number of characters that have died, come to life, and died again. And I want to say some of them have even also come back to life, although I'm not sure if I'm right about that. So way too many things happen in this season, just an insane amount. I mean, I'm only talking about the second half. I don't even remember everything in that first half. I think Gotham actually might have more like 8 or 9 seasons, and they're just broken up into half seasons, but essentially it's a whole season. Gotham has that. And Smallville did too to some degree, but it wasn't anything like as bad as this. It was more later on when we had the sheer number of villains and Superman supporting characters before Clark Kent as Superman. Of course, you probably know if you're watching this that Gotham already has... And if you've never watched an episode of Gotham, you're not going to be able to follow this at all, but you might not be able to anyway. I mean, I can't follow what's really happening in the show because, More than I could in Season 2, I will give it that. It's still, even though it feels plotted scene to scene, I'll go back to what I was going to say in a minute. Even though it's plotted scene to scene still, at least I'm not constantly watching scenes like I was in Season 2 going, I don't know why I'm watching this right now. Like, I don't know why I'm remotely supposed to care about certain events that are happening. Like, it wouldn't have any kind of context. It would just be, and then this happens, and then this happens. And here, I mean, there is that still, there's kind of that soap opera thing, but at least it feels like it's ongoing threads. None of them are paid off well, and a lot of them go on insanely too long. Others of them don't go on as long as they should and lead into some other random crazy thing. And there's still way too many main characters in this show. It seems like you've always got 8 or 10 different people with different subplots that you're supposed to be following at any amount of time, or at any given time. And a lot of things start to feel really convenient and contrived, of course. And I mean, it checks all 3 C's constantly over and over again, probably in every episode. Contrived, convenient, and convoluted. It's probably the most convoluted thing I've ever seen. And so you've got you'll have characters doing things all at the same time, where the timing is just insanely convenient that it's all happening at once. You know, Ra's al Ghul getting resurrected at around the same time that the Jeremiah Valeska fiasco was going on, and there's a number of others that are escaping me at the moment, but it's just absolutely wacky and goofy, and it stopped being fun at some point. Like, toward the middle of the season, it was starting to, as I came back to it, I came back in around 11 or 12. I was like, what was the episode I left off at? I haven't looked at this in, 4 years. Kids have gone to and graduated high school since the last time I looked at this. And I was like, I'm not going to go back and rewatch any of this stuff. I'm just going to see if I can jump in and continue watching, and I'll make a video probably and check back in before I watch season 5 and talk about the ending of the show, whatever that ends up being like. And when we get back to Jerome, who I was actually strangely liking a little bit in the previous season with the big 2-parter where he and Bruce Wayne have their whole yin-yang episode with the Funhouse mirrors, I was like, I'm liking this actor. He's fun. He knows just what he's in, and he's really derivative as a pseudo-Joker or proto-Joker or whatever. He's kind of just doing a Heath Ledger voice, but he's having a really good time, and that's infectious. And it started to go off the rails in the way I was liking it in the previous season. But it just all got really stale after a while. It started to get really predictable. Like, what was fun about it was when it would go to just these insane counterintuitive places. You would go, why would anybody do that? Why would you make Butch Solomon Grundy? That's crazy. This, random henchman guy who, we do this in TV shows a lot. We have this character who becomes kind of the breakout character, the smoking man thing, where he wasn't intended really to be a huge character, and then he ended up being in every episode. He was a really big deal. Butch is kind of like that, where he was this henchman to Fish Mooney at the beginning of the show, I think, and then he was, for whatever reason, kind of this breakout character, and he is there forever, and they can't get rid of him. I don't ever say they won't kill anybody off in the show, because they do that. They just always bring them back. And so, and they have 2, at least, really easy built-in ways to bring people back to life, and they use both of them constantly in this season. Real quick, one of them, of course, is the Lazarus Pit, and in this, we make it portable, because you don't have to go to a Lazarus Pit. We just have this Lazarus Pit juice, and that resurrects Poison Ivy, and then I think that's how she comes back, and then she ends up hating Wayne Enterprises because she thinks that stuff is toxic to plants, and it turns out that it isn't, but whatever, she's still a crazy, insane murderer, and played by an older actress now, and we age her up for no good reason, but I digress. So that's one. I just keep thinking of other really weird, random things that we do this season that I want to mention, but maybe I'll get back to that. And then we also do it with the with Hugo Strange, who just has the ability through something genetic engineering, he can bring anybody back to life. And we had a season that was a big finale where I think that was the end of 3, or maybe it was the end of 2, I can't remember. Where it must have been 3, where he. Yeah, it must have been 3, where he resurrects people, and he's making like an army and stuff, and so we brought back a lot of people that way. And so anyway, so you got crazy things like that, where we got Butch, who is Solomon Grundy, and then at the end of the season, he is gonna not be Solomon Grundy anymore because he spends the whole season, I want to say, trying to become normal again and fix his condition, but he's actually not that proactive and not really doing anything because he doesn't know what to do. But we have this kind of stupid guy that turns into a much stupider guy, who then turns around to become just the initial stupid guy again. I mean, they talk about him like he's smart, but he doesn't really do anything, so pardon me, I don't know. So he just, tries to get Penguin to get him to help him get his regular persona back, and like he gets his brain back, but he is still basically undead, and he can't be with Tabitha anymore and be undead, so he's like, another character that I don't care anything about. Why do we keep her around as a main character? Gallivant's sister. Who cares? Kill her off. Like, why? Just have a lesbian love interest for Barbara Keene. Like, and why is she still in the show? Get rid of her too. Like, I don't. Why is anybody in this show? Really, why does this show have characters? Because I don't like any of them, and I come to not care about any of them, and they're all like horrible, heinous people where you're following their, love drama and stuff, and you're going, but why am I supposed to care about that? You murder people, like, on a regular basis. And then it's like, okay, maybe there's this relative morality thing where it's like, you can't live in Gotham. This was a good idea that we had toward the beginning of the show, where you can't live in the society of Gotham and hold to any like practical regular person sense of morality. Like, you have to be morally ambiguous in order to survive in this town. And so if you're a good person, you do the best you can, but at the end of the day, it's almost like being in a different time period and just finding a way to survive. You're in Sparta or something. Like, you're gonna have to live the way they live. I understand that to some degree, but I don't know if the show is really doing that anymore. I don't know if it gets that. It's just so gimmicky. It feels like it's all about writing to the plot twist. And again, it never has any sense of direction. And it has no idea where it's going whatsoever. I find myself constantly asking questions and then going, I'm wasting my time. What is the point? Like, it doesn't know where it's going. It's basically just trying to look as pretty as it can. It's a rock band that doesn't know how to play its instruments, but looks fabulous. And then it's got to make 20-something episodes for no good reason. It might as well be 12. And then, why does it have to be so many episodes? And then it's just trying to get its episodes out every time. And if it's able to make it to the finish line and get the thing out on time, then that's a win for it. That's what it feels like. And so it seems like it's just supposed to be compelling to the audience that characters that, and even some of the villains, but especially characters like Jim Gordon and like Harvey Bullock, who is still one of the more likable characters in the show, but even he has, crossed some lines that he didn't think he'd ever cross, and maybe we didn't think he'd ever cross, but not anything like as bad as Jim Gordon. And Donald Logue still is so brilliant in this show that I can't help but still really enjoy Harvey Bullock when he's on screen. But you have these characters who, from the beginning, are trying to do the right thing and trying to uphold some kind of moral standards, and that is becoming more and more impossible, so they find themselves having to cross lines. But it doesn't feel like it's doing that all the time because the story necessitates it, but more just because it's shocking. Just, oh man, you didn't think that he'd do that. And then after that, it backtracks, and it goes, oh, but he's still kind of a good person. Oh, well, now that we've gotten a lot of flack from fans, this is what I think happened, that Gordon is completely unsympathetic, and there's no coming back from that. Now we'll start talking, way too little too late, now we'll start talking about how he's not that far away from the villains, and that he's made these huge mistakes, and he deserves to go to prison. But he can't go to prison because what else is holding this city together? I mean, I don't know. It's certainly not Jim Gordon. It seems like the only reason that he's important and Bullock in the season is making the second half of the season, making such a big deal that he needs to stay on the force and that he can't turn himself in, even though that is the right thing to do, is because without him, the city falls apart. And if that's true, it's just because he is the main character of the show. That's it. There's no other reason. And so there's just nothing to grab onto with this. It's like every character that you're watching, you're supposed to care about because they're major pop culture characters. I mean, I think it's constantly falling back on that. Ed has tortured people, and Ed Nigma, the Riddler, he's tortured people. Well, he's got he's Ed Nigma, but he's also got a alternate personality because he has multiple personality disorder, or I guess DID, and he's also got the Riddler in him, and the show cannot decide by the end of the season what exactly all of that is even about and where one entity begins, the other one ends, and it tries to write that into the story where it's like they're maybe kind of merging, but it's really clear that they just didn't think that out at all. And so anyway, so you have, just as an example, you have somebody like Ed who is sort of played like just a protagonist character. He wants to be with Lee. We're supposed to be interested to see whether or not that happens, but like the man is in a certifiable nut job, and he's being presented to us like too much of a regular protagonist. I think it does a good job of not doing that with Penguin. I think the Penguin side remains still perverse and twisted, and it's his world and we're just living in it. I don't think it can do that with Ed. I think that with certain characters like Ed, like kind of Lee by the end, like Barbara even. Barbara's somewhere in between, I guess, Ed and Penguin. But with characters like Ed, it's like it's just playing it too earnestly all at the same time as it's sort of playing it twisted also. With Penguin, I just feel like I have more of a sense of where I stand with that guy. I'm jumping everywhere. So one of the big things that got me numb by the end of the season, where I'm like, okay, the shock is worn off. It's just not fun anymore. Everything's starting to feel really redundant. You've run out of your bag of tricks. You put all the tricks back in the bag, and you're just pulling them all out again in a different order. Is the hallucinations? That's one, and then the other one is duplicates of characters and characters with more than one personality. So weirdly, hallucination becomes one of the most used words in the season from Jim Gordon. We keep coming up with ways to do the someone is not themselves episode, again, like the token yearly or more than that sometimes episodes that we had in Smallville. And we already had that with the show. This season is even worse. We've got hallucinations from Poison Ivy, who is insanely powerful when she gets older all of a sudden and is wreaking havoc on the city because she cares, you know, your typical Poison Ivy thing, she cares more about plants than people, but taken to the nines in this, like we do with everybody. She can hallucinate people just by walking into a room. She doesn't even have to kiss them on the lips anymore. It's just, oh, Poison Ivy's here, now you're hallucinating, which ends up being really convenient in a lot of scenes. And that's the way, I can't believe this is how we did this, but that's the way that Bruce Wayne comes to realize that he has a darkness in him that will eventually lead him to Batman. Yeah, that's how we did that. So he starts hallucinating, and the dream sequences that he has with this are kind of fun. It's really trippy stuff where some of our characters are playing themselves and others are being different characters. And, you know, you've got Alfred, who is not really Alfred. He's a different character. I can't remember who now, but I think maybe Bullock is Alfred or something. There's a lot of really, really strange, bizarre imagery and choices there, and then a lot of, weird trippy angles and stuff. And there is a, and if he's hallucinating for too long, he's going to die, but of course he's ultimately pulled out of it. And that's all just an excuse to get him out of the funk he's in with the, now, for anybody actually watching the show, what became kind of an infamous story choice with Bruce, the whole emo period that he went through. This is how he gets out of that funk. And he's now, this is while he's fired Alfred and everything, and right after that he's going to kind of sober up and get his wits back about him, and he starts to take responsibility for everything. And a lot of his arc through the season is about whether or not he's responsible for some of the terrible things that happen in Gotham, like regardless of whether or not they're his fault. Should he be Batman? Should he take the city as his city and just take responsibility for everything and try to fix it, try to solve the problems of the city? And he starts to come up with the vigilante idea because, and none of this stuff comes naturally. It's your really typical prequel issue, and I was really worried this would happen when the show started. I had no idea how much prequelitis would be in this show. It is Krypton bad, but it doesn't take quite as long to get that bad. Or maybe it does. I think it really just depends on how you look at it. But it's the worst that it is this season, and it didn't take Krypton any amount of time to get to some of these places. We can't just have Bruce Wayne think of the idea of being a vigilante and inspired to become Batman because he sees bats. It has to be far more convoluted than that. Now, of course, this is not me saying that characters never have any ingenuity or resourcefulness if they don't come up with ideas wholesale out of thin air. I'm not saying that people are not inspired by things or influenced by things in their lives. Of course, there are, even in non-prequel material, origin stories for the way someone comes up with ideas very often. And like I just said, we have that with Bruce Wayne, traditionally with Batman. He is attacked by bats, or he sees a bat in his I almost said belfry, in his study or something. That's the really classic way to do it. Or he falls into the bat cave or a well or something on his property, and he sees bats. Somehow he comes up with this idea. But here it has to be the 1-2 punch of, there is this dark side of him that is personified, that comes and speaks to him and basically says, you're going to be Batman. He doesn't say Batman, but he's in silhouette, and it's wearing clearly a bat costume, and he's like, I was created when your parents died, and you need to be proactive and, take responsibility and stop the problems of the city. And then, of course, there's also going to, with Ra's al Ghul, be a prophecy. And, of course, there's a prophecy. He can't just become Batman because of the psychological notions that get him there. There has to be some portent from where we look into the future. Someday you're going to become Batman. We always do this with prequel stuff. It's really, really awful here. So anyway, that's done with Hallucinations from Poison Ivy. Okay. I don't know why she has to create hallucinations, but that's what we did. And then we also do it again with Mad Hatter, but at least that's and Scarecrow does it too, of course, but that's a typical Scarecrow thing, and it's not as bad with Mad Hatter, and I liked their Mad Hatter before, but we have yet another whole episode where it's just Jim running around yelling at people, "You're hallucinating! You break out of that!" So you have a lot of the major villains that we've used in previous seasons coming back in order to basically be henchmen for other villains. And it's crazy the sheer number of major Batman villains that all wind up in the same scenes together in this season, and that's done primarily with Jerome Valeska, the Proto-Joker, who, like I said, my eyes started to kind of widen, and my ears were pricking up a little bit, as I should say, when he came back, because it was kind of fun as he breaks out of Arkham. That whole thing was easy, but he breaks out of Arkham and brings several villains with him, like Mad Hatter and Scarecrow, and I think Firefly maybe is with them. And anyway, and Penguin is there, who's reluctant and not sure how he feels about what Jerome is doing, and is kind of ironically the only one of sound mind who's like, well, if we let Jerome do everything he wants to do, he's going to basically tear the whole city down, and I'm not just an insane... I mean, he is insane, but I don't just want to see chaos. I want order. I want to rule Gotham. This is all I've ever wanted. Penguin is the most consistent character in the show, I think. All he's ever wanted is to... take territory and rule Gotham the way Carmine Falcone did. And then also, he's the most vindictive person on the planet, and if somebody wrongs him, he will patiently pursue them until the end of time just to get his revenge, which this does at the end of the season, but in, again, a really convoluted and really stretched out kind of way with Tabitha. Because Tabitha murdered his mother, and he wants revenge for that, so he goes to Butch. Like I said earlier, Butch wants him to help him become ungrundyified. But he doesn't just go to Penguin and say, I need you to help me do this. He doesn't actually want anything to do with Penguin. But Penguin says, I know where Hugo Strange is, or I can find him, and I can make him, if we give him enough money, I'm sure that he will fix you. And Butch goes along with this, even though Penguin doesn't seem to have really any clue as to what he's doing and how to get there. And it's just episode and episode of one step forward, two steps back, and Butch getting really impatient, but staying with him anyway. And then by the end of the season, again, his motivations are really consistent. The show never forgets who Penguin is. It's one of the things I can really give it. It doesn't know what to do with that, what to do with Riddler. But from day one, it has kind of a vision for Penguin that it never gets away from. Again, not to say that the stories aren't horribly convoluted and contrived, but at least we never lose sense of who this guy is. And you get to the end of the season, and the only reason that he was trying to help Butch, it turns out, is because he's basically saying to Butch that he's going to rule Gotham again. And remember, at the beginning of the season, he's the mayor, and he's really got the city under his thumb. And then he ultimately ends up in Gotham again, or in Arkham again, and he's back to square one. So when he gets out, he goes to Butch, and he's like, I'm going to need a right-hand man. And Butch is like, I don't want anything to do with you. He's like, well, I can get you fixed. We just got to give Hugo Strange a bunch of money. And you get to the end, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, unless there's a scene I missed, or just something that I'm not remembering, because I was thinking that a lot, especially this season. I have this with the show a lot, but especially this season, where I'm going, okay, did it just not track? Did it just not follow? Or did I actually miss something where it does make sense, or sort of makes sense? What I saw, anyway, because both things could potentially be happening. I mean, you end up in a place where you're not that invested, and you're having a difficult time keeping up with everything because it's not presenting characters that you care about, and you're not trusting it is the big thing. You're like, well, there's all these places where you contradict yourself and retcon yourself, why, and there are no stakes because you can resurrect anybody anytime, so why am I supposed to care? But I'm going to talk about this on video, so I have to pay attention as best I can. So, Penguin, all of a sudden out of nowhere, is like, oh, I know where Hugo Strange is. And Butch goes, you've been holding out on me. He's like, no, I just found out. And I don't know how he found out. I don't think there's anything that ever tells us that. And so he goes to Hugo Strange. And and Butch is like, well, we don't have the money. We weren't able to raise that. And he's like, oh, well, we can make him do it. And, okay, why didn't you do that in the first place? And then they go to Hugo Strange, and I don't remember them trying to torture Strange or pay him or anything. He just seems to be okay. I can't remember if there's any reason that Hugo Strange actually goes along with this. Again, I might be missing something. And then Hugo Strange has like people he's kidnapped, I guess, that are giving blood. And there's this easy technobabble, something, and then Butch will be fine. Okay. And then he fixes Butch, right? This is the last episode of the season, or toward the end. And Penguin this is just as the no man's land is about to happen. We'll talk about that here in a little bit with the whole Jeremiah Valeska nonsense. And Penguin goes, okay, I fixed you. And Tabitha's there. And he goes, I can't remember why she was even there. That's feeling convenient to me right now all of a sudden. But Tabitha's there. And she's like, oh, good, we fixed Butch. I got my boyfriend back now. He's not an undead monster. We can sleep together and murder people together again. It'll be happily ever after. And Penguin goes, no. He goes, and this is where it gets predictable, because you knew as soon as that happened that somebody was going to get shot. And he goes, no, I only brought Butch back so that I could kill him in front of you. As the completely fixed person, so that you would suffer because you killed my mother. And like that's a guy with a long memory. Like, obviously he's gonna remember the person that killed his mother, but like that is a long con, and an unnecessarily long con. Because if he knew where Hugo Strange was all along, why didn't he do that episodes and episodes ago? What was the point of stretching it out for Butch? Like, Tabitha's not hanging out with him. Tabitha's with Barbara, as she's busy getting the demon's head and ostensibly becoming the next Ra's al Ghul, which doesn't actually happen. And that whole thing was as nuts as the Butch choice. Again, the show's just trying to make me insane. So I don't know. Maybe he didn't string him along. Maybe he didn't know where Hugo Strange was until that point. But then what was the point of spending all that time raising money if they ultimately didn't really need it? Unless they did bring him a bunch of money, and I don't remember that, but I don't think that happened. It was nuts. We keep resurrecting people this season, and we keep killing people, and in a scene toward the end of an episode to try to get a rise out of the audience. And you go, well, you can't have it both ways. If you can't resurrect people to shock me and murder people to shock me, because anybody could come back at any time, and that keeps constantly happening. And by the end, my eyes were really glazing over, particularly when we kill the Riddler and Lee, because they're coming back, and that's all part of the really convoluted love triangle and just love drama nonsense where Penguin has this unrequited love for the Riddler, and the Riddler doesn't, or for Ed, and Ed doesn't reciprocate. I guess mostly just because one of these people is homosexual and the other one is heterosexual, and he's just not interested in Penguin in that way. He's also, I can't tell if their friendship was ever really genuine, or if Riddler was just using him, but Penguin really was in love with him. I'm a little fuzzy on that whole thing. And then Ed has this unrequited love for Lee, who is just using him for the whole season to get what she wants, which is peace in the Narrows, and to just help people out in the Narrows. And I guess that's partly why we're still supposed to care about her, because even though she does do some reprehensible things, it's all sort of, until the end, in the name of helping people. And of being there for these people that Gotham has forgotten, that are at the bottom of the totem pole in the Narrows. And by the end, she has all this talk with Gordon, like, you've never really known who I am and what I'm capable of, and it seems like she's just as, maybe just as evil and nuts as everybody else in Gotham. Okay. Because that's interesting. And I found myself more sick of the Ed Lee love nonsense than I was with the stuff with her and Gordon, because they at least had chemistry. They at least kind of made sense together for a minute, and I got really, again, sick of being strung along and off again, on again. But once you have the thing with Ed and Lee, you're like, well, you know that's never going to remotely work out. And again, they don't really have that kind of chemistry, and it's obvious that she's just using him. And I also don't understand what the personality thing is with Ed. What it really feels like is that they took the Riddler and Two-Face from Batman Forever and they merged them and they made them one character, where you have a Riddler who has the multiple personalities of Two-Face, a character that we set up early on in the show and haven't done anything with. And I don't know if he came back somewhere and I'm not remembering it, and maybe he'll be used in Season 5, but Harvey Dent has not been a thing in this show, and it's like because he's missing, we have to do some kind of multiple personality thing with Ed. And we have this motif of doubles in this show. And I don't know if that's supposed to be a cute and clever, nod to the Batman idea, if we're trying to do, a duality thing before we get to Batman, or if it's just, again, gimmicks because we're desperate for material and we're just, again, writing the plot twist. So we go, what's something that we can use to shock an audience and, really surprise people? And what is madness like? Well, you got good and evil, you got masks, it's Batman. You got good and evil, you got masks, you've got the good side and the bad side winning out and taking over. You got the one bad day idea where you have a good person, but they become psychotic and they never come back from that. So let's just really literalize that and have characters that have a good twin and an evil twin, both of which have to ultimately be the evil twins. And let's have characters with multiple personalities where one is bad and one is more bad. And at the end of the day, they're both exactly the same. And let's have clones and, so we do that kind of thing all through the show. And I hesitate even calling it a motif because it seems more like just easy gimmicks. And like I said earlier, you have Edward Nigma, who has this puppy love thing for Lee, and he is still a bad person, but he's not supposed to be quite the sadist that the Riddler is, I guess, and he's not as smart as the Riddler, or at least that's what we're told. Everything is ostensible with the show, by the way. It's really good at tell, don't show. It's like, it tells you that characters are smart, and it tells you that characters are several steps ahead. And it's not very good at showing those things. The way that it shows that the Riddler is smart is that he's constantly telling riddles. That's it. And a lot of them are either easy to figure out or 60s Batman riddles where nobody would ever come up with the answer, or where we'll act like there's only one, but there's actually a whole bunch of them, but it only counts if you say the one that's in his head. Even really good, well-written riddles are sometimes a little bit like that last thing. But this feels like riddles written on the back of a bubblegum wrapper. And it's always been like that once we got to the Riddler, but it's even sillier later. In any given scene, the show cannot keep straight what Ed and what the Riddler are. The Riddler does not want to be called Ed. He is not Ed. He takes over middle of the season, and the idea is, it's very difficult to describe because the way it is trying to present itself is that the Riddler takes over, and then Ed is constantly trying to reassert himself, and that subconsciously he is kind of seeping ideas into the Riddler's head. So he's starting to take on attributes from the Riddler. But that's not how it watches. It watches like that's an excuse for it just not knowing what the psychology is at all. That's how it watches to me. There's a scene shortly after the Riddler takes over, before Ed's had a chance to seep in that much, where Lee or somebody calls him Ed, or I can't remember, maybe he even calls himself Ed, I forget, but like he's fine with it, he just moves on, and I'm like, but you had this whole thing where you didn't want to be called Ed, you act like that was a different entity, and it just felt like the show could not keep that straight, didn't know what that was, and by the end of the season, I don't know which is which, and he even has a line where he's like, and this is why it's difficult to describe, because I could see an argument for, well, no, Cap, it's exactly as it's describing itself, but I'm just not buying it. The writing's just not good enough. There's a line where he's like, I'm starting to not know where like the Riddler ends and Ed begins, or vice versa. And so it thinks it's doing that, but it feels like an excuse to me the whole way through. And so then you have the Jerome Jeremiah thing, which is another, duality, two sides of the same coin kind of thing. And it's the show's attempt at cleverly not making the person you thought was the Joker, because the Joker is supposed to classically not have an origin, or you're never totally sure what the origin is. I mean, that's not really what ends up happening. We know what the origin is. We know who the Joker is. It's just not who it was originally kind of presented as. So it's, again, that really gimmicky Smallville thing of it can't... The person that is actually the classic, iconic character has to be the opposite of that character initially. Or somebody else has to give that character the idea for it, so that it's not what you would expect, and because it's a prequel, it's exactly what you would expect, because so many prequels do this kind of thing. This just does it a lot worse than a lot of them. So, if memory serves, the writers of this show kept swearing up and down that Jerome was not the Joker, or that we shouldn't assume that he would be. And again, I think they're writing scene to scene, because I don't think they knew what the Joker was going to be, and it really watches like they don't know if they're getting canceled or not, because I know the second half of this season started to dip really hard in ratings. It was doing better than it had been earlier in the season. I think word got around that 3 was more fun after it got past the really awful Azrael stuff from season 2, and maybe some people came back and were like, I'll give it a chance again. It is a Batman thing. And I mean, they rest on their laurels so hard with the it's a Batman thing, where it's like we're entitled for viewership just because we're adapting material people like. I've said this 1,000 times, but then just make a Batman show. You want to do every single character anybody's ever heard of in Batman? Why don't you just make a Batman show? It looks so good all the time. It's so wonderfully stylized. You're basically making Batman Returns the series. And you've got all these costumes with the villains. How hard would it be to put a man in a bat suit? And how much more money would it cost you to just put a guy in a bat suit? I know I've said that before, but I cannot get through a Gotham rant, which is what this has turned into, without saying that. So if memory serves, early on, they're like, you're never going to know who the Joker is. It could be a number of different characters. And then they kind of went back on that, and they've just got this Jerome kid who's going to be the proto-Joker. So they could have done both. It could have been a character that you've had through the whole show who is inspired by Jerome, who then becomes the Joker. But that's not what we do. Instead, there's this kid who is not going to be the Joker, who is gradually, obviously turning into the Joker, who basically becomes the Joker, but not in name. He even has the scars on his face like Heath Ledger Joker. The only thing he's missing is the makeup. And when he gets taken to Arkham the first time, or maybe it's even before that, I can't remember, you have all these insane people throughout Gotham who are inspired by Jerome and want to live like him. It's all about anarchy and chaos. And so essentially, you've already had the Joker. So all that's missing now is that he's calling himself that, and also that he is, I don't know, like a little bit better at crime, maybe? Because the show's interpretation of the Joker is you're not the Joker unless you have these great, like, master manipulation plots. And the Jerome Joker, the Jerome version is a little bit more like what Heath Ledger claims, but Heath Ledger's Joker claims, but isn't quite the dog chasing cars. So do I look like a man with like a guy with a plan? I'm like, well, yeah, a little bit. And in this show, it's he doesn't look like a guy with a plan. He really is just making it all up as he goes along. I mean, kind of. And then his twin brother that we didn't know about until 2 or 3 episodes before he truly starts to become the actual Joker, shows up and hates his brother because he tortured him when he was a kid. And he is the logical, sensible one who is sane, but not so sane that he won't kidnap his brother and put him in a room and just hold him there in the middle of a maze that he built. So, I mean, there's clearly something kind of weird going on there. Although Gordon and Bullock talk about him like he's, before we see how insane he really is, they talk about Jeremiah, the tortured twin brother of Jerome, played by the same actor, by the way. And the two, what is his name? I'm forgetting. It's Cameron Monaghan. This guy is actually quite brilliant in creating 2 different characters. I kept having to remind myself I was looking at a different actor, and for a split second I wasn't sure, and I looked it up just to make sure. He's giving a very, very different performance when he's Jeremiah, and the differences are subtle, but there's something he's doing in the face where he just looks like a different person, and it's really impressive because even when that guy goes insane, or shows that he's insane, or I'm not fully sure what's going on there, he still feels like that original character, and he doesn't just suddenly transform into Jerome. It's brilliant. It's kind of a masterstroke. Again, I don't love that he just sounds like Heath Ledger, and he starts to go into that too when he gets the makeup as the other character. But there is something he's doing in the way he's holding himself and the mannerisms with the face. This kid just naturally is able to transform himself into a different person. That whole thing is really impressive. And I liked watching him a lot. I also was really interested in this Jeremiah kid, and when he ultimately ends up just being an insane person who claims he's sane, it got a lot less interesting than where I thought it was going. But anyway, so Gordon and Bullock talk about him like he's, even before that happens, like he's crazier than they probably should be in Gotham, where he locked his brother in a room in the middle of a maze. He's certifiable. He's totally out there. And I'm like, think about the people that you deal with on a daily basis and things you've done, Gordon. But also, not that they've seen the show that I'm going to compare this to, but The Flash did that for seasons and seasons in a CW show, and he was supposed to be the most altruistic and righteous character in the Arrowverse, and he just took bad guys that he apprehended and had a private prison for them? I don't know if this is any different than that. But anyway, so what it initially looks like with Jeremiah is that he is just trying to get closure with his brother and find a way to move on. He has hidden himself away in a maze for years and years, and is, finally captured his brother. And I thought where it was going was that we were going to see him, gradually kind of either transform into him or realize that he was crazier than he thought he was. He has a invention that is kind of your typical renewable energy machine that's supposed to run all of Gotham on just a couple of small generators, and it's completely clean, free energy, that whole thing. And then, he's when he meets Bruce Wayne, they hit it off, and it seems like they could be, great partners. And you know where this is all going. You're like, okay, we're establishing the yin-yang thing with Batman and the Joker. And then it turns out that the renewable energy machines are just bombs, and that he's planning on blowing up Gotham in order to outdo everything that his brother did. Where he goes, I am meticulous, and I think several steps ahead, and I'm going to take over the city, but I'm going to do it in a sane way. So I'm not about chaos. I hate everything my brother did, but I'm still bad. I'm still, willing to kill people. So I'm going to do the things my brother did better than him by proving that sanity wins out over insanity, I guess, is the whole idea. And he either was always that way and was pretending to be more normal, or he was transformed that way when Jerome hits him with his Joker toxin, which Scarecrow makes. And I like that he works with Scarecrow in order to make that. And then that's why he goes crazy. The problem is he already had the energy machines built, and it seems like he's got this big master plan that would have taken months and months to put together. So I start wondering about the timeline again. And maybe on a second watch, now that I'm planning on doing that, it would make more sense. But while I'm watching it, I'm like, how much time has passed since Jerome hit him with that toxin and his big, epic plot, really complicated plot, where he has bombs all over Gotham, and he's able to just press a button, and one by one he's dropping buildings. By the way, one of the better effects in the season is they drop that big clock tower that looks like Big Ben, with a bomb that Jeremiah put in it, and it looks really good. I was pretty impressed with that shot. The show always looks great, and I can't tell which it is. Like I don't know if a lot of time passed in between there, or if the idea was supposed to be that while I was watching it, it watched like the toxin didn't actually really affect him because he was already that far gone. In an episode called One Bad Day, which I guess was supposed to imply more to Bruce because Jeremiah was trying to turn him insane by doing horrible, by making him think that horrible things were happening to Alfred when he was on a toxin himself, and then that doesn't end up happening with Bruce, of course, where he's got the one bad day and he goes crazy. So I don't know if that title was more about what happened to Jeremiah years ago with his brother, or if it was about the scene we saw where Jerome hit him with the gas. I'm really not sure what's happening there. But I also don't understand why the gas didn't just put him into an insane laughing fit that will ultimately kill him like it does to everybody else that gets hit by it. Like, is it a different kind of toxin? Is it some different formula? I don't think we're ever told about that. Regardless, it's just not as interesting as it should have been. There's all this talk from Jeremiah about how Bruce is his best friend, which kind of comes out of nowhere because they haven't known each other for very long, and all of that seemed really rushed in a season that does 6 billion things. They could have axed a lot of them so that we could have spent some time with that, and it would have been nice if we'd had some, more, like, gradual arcs that took their time a little bit over a few episodes. Now everything's got to be done in like 1 or 2 episodes. It's like I said, it feels like there's actually 8 or 10 seasons of this show, which is only a 5-season show. But if you look at the sheer number of stories that we're telling, it feels more like 23 seasons of television, all just condensed really hard. So many extremes in modern TV. I mean, I realize this is like 4 years old now, but my point stands. You either have shows that are really decompressed, where we get a movie's amount of story done in like 10 or 12 episodes, and the pacing, the really slow pacing, is often not warranted. Or we truncate stuff into a couple of episodes that we really needed more time to tell that story. So by the end, I've kind of glossed over the Ra's al Ghul stuff, but it's awful. I love Alexander Siddig, who was Bashir in Deep Space Nine. Eric and I both said when we reviewed some of the stuff earlier that we thought he was brilliant casting, and he is kind of phoning it in when he comes back. You can tell that he's not real into the material, and he doesn't know what's happening, and I read in an interview somewhere that he said something about how I think he called it like a season of extremes or something, and it seemed like that was his like nice way of saying this thing is off the rails and it's too insane. But I'll show up for my paycheck, I guess, and that's the way it seemed to me with him anyway. all these characters that we killed off. Like, Jerome, dies earlier, gets brought back to life, now dies again for real this time, I guess, permanently, just because the show doesn't want him to be the actual real Joker. And of course, not that interesting that your new Joker is just gonna be I was gonna say this guy informed too much by somebody else who became the Joker. I guess at least he's not just following off of his brother's footsteps, or following after his footsteps, like the stupid 2 Jimmy Olsen thing in Smallville. Oh, that wasn't the real Jimmy Olsen. Here's this kid. He's going to follow in his brother's footsteps. They're both called Jimmy. He's going to take his camera and go off and be Jimmy Olsen. At least he's not doing that. But it still just kind of sucks that you've got this proto-Joker that does all of the original Joker iconography, and then this other guy is going to end up being that after him. And I haven't seen him fully fall into the Joker thing, but obviously he's going to have to start acting more like his brother to be the full-on Joker, so I guess it is still kind of like that. But anyway, so you have Ra's al Ghul, who's died already, and he's brought back to life because somebody in the League of Shadows is like, he gave the demon's head to the wrong person. He gave it to Barbara, so she's got a glowing hand, and that means that the League has to follow her now, even though they don't like her, and she doesn't have any, their best interest at heart, and she doesn't have the same motivations that Ra's al Ghul did, because she's just a mustache-twirling, psychopathic mob boss, and she wants to run Gotham just like everybody wants to run Gotham, and it's more fun with the Penguin, but that's a lot of people's motivation in this, and she is just going to use the demon's head to do that. And so she's like, well, you the League of Shadows, you have to follow me, you're basically my slaves, help me rule Gotham. And they're like, well, we don't want to do that, but I guess you have the stupid glowy fist, like your Iron Fist, so we have to follow you, so I guess we'll do that for, as long as we have to, but we're going to try to stop it in some way. So it's this, of course, traditional, so it's tradition that the demon's head can't be given to a woman, but for some reason Ra's al Ghul gave it to a woman, so like, well, you can't be a woman. She's like, well, I am, so what are you going to do about it? And then she ends up gunning down, the League women end up gunning down most of the men that are in the League, all in the same room. Like, they just all show up and they're there where Barbara is because she has the demon's head. And then the women just murder all the men. And are like, we'll follow you, Barbara, you're a woman, rah-rah, girl power or whatever. Which is hilariously, very cringe-inducingly paid off again, or brought back at the end, when we get to the No Man's Land, where Barbara starts a gang, and out of nowhere, because it's been so long since that happened, and she's never had this sexist, like, men suck thing since then, she goes, I'm realizing that all my problems are caused by men. Let's have a gang of all women. And all the women in her gang are like, yeah, let's do that. Like, everybody's carving up territories, because the bridges have been busted down after Jeremiah tried to set off a bunch of bombs in the whole city, and he didn't succeed, but we still lost all the bridges, even though there wasn't the giant cataclysm like in the comics where you had earthquakes that leveled Gotham. As far as I can tell, Gotham didn't actually really get leveled. The only reason it's a no man's land is because nobody can leave. Just the bridges are broken down. That's it. I'm not, am I missing something? Was there actually a cataclysm and I missed it? Because earlier there's Ra's al Ghul's prophecy partly is about the cataclysm. But then there's not a cataclysm, but there's still a no man's land. If there is a cataclysm, it's not a very big one. I did not see a bunch of buildings destroyed. Unless I was so uninvested I missed all the destruction, but it certainly wasn't shut down to the point that it was in the comics with No Man's Land, because there's still electricity, and Gordon's able to turn on a light, a proto bat signal that makes Bruce Wayne come, and he's like, hey, Bruce, you're not supposed to be here. And Bruce's line should have been, well, you turn on the bat signal. But anyway, I digress. So there's it just didn't seem like an actual real cataclysm. But anyway, so just like in No Man's Land, you have all these villains, these psychopaths, mob bosses, and people that are all carving up parts of the city. And it goes without saying that it already felt like a No Man's Land a lot in the show, and there's already been, stories in this where it seems like the bad guys are running everything. So doing No Man's Land in this is very strange because it already feels like been there, done that territory. And we've already even had some of the gangs that were made up for No Man's Land in this show. Like, the show really likes No Man's Land already, and now it's just doing it. And I'm expecting that to last 2 episodes, but I guess we'll see what it's like when I actually get into that season. There's no way they did No Man's Land for 22 episodes. I would not think. I will be actually kind of impressed if they did that. But I really don't think they did that. Or for however long that season was. And Barbara has a gang, and she goes, like I said, all my problems have been created by men. And so all the women in her gang are like, yeah, we agree. And they just murder all the men, and then they put up a big sign that's like, whatever the name of her gang is, and then women. So I guess she's going to have a whole thing the next season about, hating men. And, I don't know. It's just crazy. I wasn't expecting that. That was really out of nowhere. The show that has been kind of a wish fulfillment BDSM fantasy, for a lack of a better way to put it, for men writing women that have no idea how to write women, suddenly have a character doing that. I don't know. It's out there. Hey, craziest thing that happens in the season, or one of them, is the one that most jumps out at me, is when the Penguin tries to beat Jerome intellectually with pantomime. He's like, I can out nutso your nutso. So Jerome's about to kill. They're in Arkham together, and Jerome's about to kill him, and he goes, "You can't hurt me, 'cause I've got an invisible wall up." He basically turns into a mime, and then Jerome goes along with it, and he can't break through his invisible wall. And it's ultimately just him kind of like calling his bluff or something, or just, like appreciating that Penguin is meeting his crazy, I guess. And so it, I don't know, more or less sort of made sense that he did that. It wasn't that he actually thought that he couldn't break through that wall, but I guess he respected Penguin for trying something that audacious. Boy, in the moment, I was just like, I'm watching these two villains sparring with pantomime. It's nuts. There's also this episode where there's a place where rich people pay to go into a nursery and be treated like babies. And I've never seen anything like that. But it was really disturbing, and I guess that was the point. Anyway, I don't know what the point of this video was, except I just wanted to relay the madness and all the crazy stuff I saw, so that I can say that I've done that before I go into Season 5. And now, straight after this, I guess I'm going to start watching Season 5. And I'll tell you what I think of how we get Bruce Wayne to become Batman. And I've seen the pictures of the suit and all that, and the pictures of the really bloated-looking Joker. We'll see how Jeremiah gets to that whole thing. There are elements I didn't talk about. I'm already well after an hour. I wasn't planning on talking this long. I hope that was remotely coherent. I don't have a lot of analysis to give because it's not that kind of show. It's just episode to episode, coming up with new insane twists to give you, and like I said, by the end it gets really predictable, and I feel like I've seen everything, and I'm starting to be able to call things. Oh, that guy's going to pull out a gun now. Oh, he's going to shoot that person. Oh, next scene it's going to turn out that they're either not dead, like with Selena, I didn't even talk about that whole thing, or that they're being resurrected. So what is the season about? I mean, I guess relative madness, sort of redemption. Like, can you come back from doing the absolute most heinous things? What is the priority when the world doesn't conform to your morality? Should you do the right thing, or should you do the thing that, the utilitarian thing, the thing that saves the most people or makes the most people happy. Is it possible in a really corrupt society to, this is the Bruce Wayne dilemma, I suppose, to help people just to help people? Or is that something that people ever even do at all? Does anyone actually help people just for the sake of helping people? That was a line that Selena had that I actually thought was surprisingly poignant for this show. But that's mostly what the ideas are about. Bruce Wayne still having his coming-of-age story, which is difficult to really appreciate because he's working too often with nut jobs and not begrudgingly enough. That was a whole thing that I had a difficult time with. There's an episode where he's having to run around with Barbara, and, like, he's not comfortable with it, of course, but he, like Gordon, treats some of the bad guys, some of the killers, too much like regular people sometimes. And if the show was more consistent in the good people, or the people trying to remain good, just not having anybody else they can work with, and just through desperation begrudgingly working with these people, I could swallow it more. But I feel like the show itself can't always decide what characters' morality is, and if it bothers them that they're working with killers and psychopaths. So that's a problem with the show. Gordon's main character arc is again about is kind of a redemptive thing about him trying to decide if because he feels as bad as some of the people that he's been fighting, if he needs to go to prison and pay his debt to society, or if the way he pays his debt to society is to continue to serve. And that's Harvey Bullock's position, certainly. And so I guess it's kind of opposing character arcs with Bruce and Gordon, or two sides of the same idea, where part of the problem, though, is that Bruce has also had to do some pretty awful, or at least questionable, things before he becomes Batman. Maybe we've gone too morally ambiguous with him as well, but all things being equal, kind of forgetting that it's a character trying to decide if you can be good for the sake of being good in the first place, and kind of become, as a younger guy with Bruce, what Gordon wanted to be in the first place, which is a guy who just helps for the sake of helping and tries to ignore the moral gray in Gotham and do the right thing regardless of the society's standards or lack thereof. And then Gordon, a guy who has crossed that line way, way too far, trying to figure out how close he can get back to the middle. So maybe it's these guys both trying to kind of get to a middle in some way, I guess, is what the season is about. But anyway, I'm going to go watch Season 5, and I'll talk about that after I have done that. I'm probably not going to split it into 2 videos unless just so much happens in the first half of the season. But I just did that with this because Eric and I had talked a little bit about 4 here and there, and then we got bored with it and quit. And now I have watched that, so I rambled on for a good long time, and that's all I'm going to say about it. So thanks a lot for watching. Leave your comments if you saw that season. Tell me what you thought of it. It's wacky. I've lost brain cells. I forgot some words and what they mean now, and hopefully it's probably not smart to go right into 5. Maybe I should go back and watch, like, My Dinner with Andre again or something to cleanse my palate, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go right into 5. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you again next time. I was Captain Logan, and that's it for now. Bye, folks.